Hey, Parkview, good to see you guys. Always good to be here. Orland, New Lenox, good to have you. Homer Glenn, online, all of you. I'm Tim. I'm one of the teaching pastors here. And I want to start with a question, okay? Don't raise your hand because I don't want it to be awkward. But have you ever tried to run from God? I know you thought I was going to ask you, like, if you cared if the Knicks won. But no, it's a deeper question than that, right? And of course you don't. Nobody cares the Knicks won. Have you ever tried to run from God? And some of you are gonna you're gonna hear that and you're like, no, not really. But maybe that's because you didn't run from God completely, like our story today. Maybe you just ran in one part of your life. You know, God, you can have most of my life, but stay out of this part, right? Not this relationship, God. I'm gonna run away from you a little bit here. This business decision, this addiction, this bitterness, my finances, that area is mine. I'm not running from all the areas, just this one area. So again, don't answer, but how many of you have run? How many of you are running from God right now? Let's just get it right off the bat, okay? Here's the good news for you. You can run from God, but you can't outrun God. Today we're going to talk about the story of Jonah. I posted on Instagram the story of a guy who didn't like the people around him so much that he literally asked God to die. And I know you don't know that part of the story because it's the part we don't focus on, but I want you to hear the whole story today as we talk about some of these curious characters from the Bible that maybe you don't know all that much about. And the reason I'm doing this one is because Summer Jam starts this week, and you got to know that I wish that my grandkids were here because they would be the first people here. Summer Jam was one of the most important things for our kids growing up, and it's an important program for us, and it's fun. And if you've still got kids around that aren't signed up, you ought to do it. But many of you will have kids or grandkids or whatever in the program this week, and they're going to talk about Jonah. But the part they're going to talk about with Jonah is the running from God and God's graciousness, okay? This is the theme verse for the week at Summer Jam. You are a forgiving God, a gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, and abounding in love. That's God's own definition of who he is. And so the theme this week is God loves me even when I make the wrong choice. God helps me even when I make the wrong choice. And God forgives me even when I make the wrong choice. So I'm guessing that most of you knows a little bit about Jonah and the fact that he tried to run from God. And I just want to address the whale in the room, if you were, right up front, okay? Jonah and the whale is a story that a lot of people have a problem with. Because, it doesn't make sense, right? But out of all the stories, it seems to me that this is one of the top ones that people, when I talk to, are like, yeah, I just can't buy that Jonah thing, okay? Which is funny to me because it seems like the story of a guy who died and was buried for 3 days and then rose again ought to be harder to believe than that a whale swallowed a guy for 3 days and puked him up on the shore. But besides the point, let's do a little work here on the background, just so that I want you to get what the Bible's where the Bible's coming from, and unpack it for you. Okay, 2021, just 5 years ago, this guy Michael Packard was diving for lobsters off of Cape Cod and suddenly felt a huge impact and found himself in complete darkness. He initially thought he'd been attacked by a shark. But then he realized he was inside the mouth of a humpback whale. True story, Google it. After roughly 30 to 40 seconds, not 3 days, the whale surfaced and expelled him, and all he suffered was bruising and a dislocated knee. Can we just, though, do you think he went straight to church? Can you imagine? Marine biologists generally believe that he was accidentally scooped up in a lunge that the humpback whale makes to get food and just never entered the man's stomach. But you just got to imagine what it was like to be this guy. But that just happened 5 years ago. So what do you do with the Jonah story? Well, for one thing, and I like to point this out, when we're studying the Bible, we have to actually interpret what the Bible says. And the Bible does not say that Jonah was swallowed by a whale. There are no whales in the Mediterranean. It says it's a big fish, okay? So don't make the Bible say things it doesn't say. Don't mesh Pinocchio and the Bible all together and come up with your own version of the story, okay? It doesn't mean there wasn't ever a whale in the Mediterranean. If God wanted a whale to be in the Mediterranean, he could, but it doesn't say that, so that's the important thing. But really, that just makes the problem worse, because what kind of a fish could it be, right? Number two, it could be a story. It could just be an allegory. I think the place that people get messed up in Revelation is that it is a spiritual story told in physical terms, and people try to figure all the things out in this spiritual story that's meant to be a spiritual story, and they try to figure out how it all works on earth and how it's going to work on earth. The problem, though, with Jonah, if you're going to make it just an allegory, just a story, is that Jesus said, as Jonah was 3 days in the belly of the fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days in the belly of the earth. He's predicting what is going to happen, and he alludes to the Jonah story, which all of them knew. Now, nobody still figured it out until after it was all over, what Jesus was talking about. But Jesus alludes to it. It sounds like a true story. He could have been alluding to it as a mythical story, but it seemed like everyone accepted that this miracle probably actually happened. I love the story of the little girl who was in school one day, and the teacher was talking about whales, and somehow they got around the Pinocchio thing, and the teacher said, I just need you to know that it's physically impossible for a whale to swallow a human, because even though they're a very large mammal and have a very large mouth, their throat is very small. And the little girl raised her hand and she said, but Jonah was swallowed by a whale. And the teacher said, well, again, I just need to say that a whale could not swallow a human. It's physically impossible. And the little girl said, well, when I get to heaven, I'm going to ask Jonah. And the teacher said, well, what if Jonah's not there? And the little girl said, well, then you can ask him. I love that little girl. Third thing, though, it doesn't matter, okay? It doesn't matter if it's a true story or an allegory. Here's what's important. If you can't accept that it actually could have happened, then you got a bigger problem with God than this story. Because everything in the Bible flows from the very first words of the Bible. In the beginning, God created. And he created whales, he created big fish, and I believe that if God wanted to send a Tyrannosaurus Rex into my neighborhood, that evidently would have had to be toothless so that he could grab me and swallow me and keep me around for 3 days and teach me a lesson and spit me back out again, I believe that God could do it, because I believe that God is supernatural. What I'm saying is, if you can let go of the technical rationality of this story if you want. Let it be an allegory if you want. But don't let go of the fact that God is the eternal creator of everything that we know, and he can do whatever he wants to with his creation. That's the important part. And one of the things that he does with his creation is he tries his best to save those of us who are running. He tries his best to keep us from running away, to bring him back to himself. So why do we do it? Why do we run? Well, I think we run from God because we don't really believe how good he is. If you see God as the principal or, the police or the man in some way, a lot of us are going to run. And unfortunately, if you grew up in a church situation that wasn't healthy, you might be confusing the church and God, and you may be here, you may be listening to me online, you may be going like, yeah, I'm running away from that God I didn't like, and I understand that. I understand why you run away. C.S. Lewis asked a schoolboy one day, what is God like? And the boy said, God is the sort of person who is always snooping around to see if anyone's enjoying himself and then trying to stop it. Like Santa, I guess. And if you live with that concept of God, that makes you feel like God is a cop following you, right? All the time. And that's a crazy feeling. And I just got to say to all of our officers, I'm sorry, but I don't feel good about having a police officer follow me. Do you? I mean, I know I should, because if anything goes wrong, they're going to be there. But that's not how I feel. I just feel nervous. because I know me. So my hands are at 10 to 2. I use the turn signals correctly. I do the correct speed. And at some point, I'm going to turn into Walmart so that he can go on and I can just go do something else. Because it just makes me that nervous. And I'm sorry to all you officers. It's not you, it's me. But that's the wrong concept of God. The right concept of God, which should make you not want to run away, is that God is your dad who loves you. And if my dad is following me, I'm not anxious at all. I'm happy because I just know he's there if I need him. And sure, in my case, I'm going to have to slow down because my dad drives like an old man, but that's probably not a bad analogy either. Maybe I ought to do that. So let's talk about Jonah. Whenever a man or a woman decides, intentionally or unintentionally, to run away from God, here's what we learn. 3 things always happen. Jonah 1:1, here we go. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai, go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it because its wickedness has come up before me. Okay, I'll get into this a little bit more in a minute. So what does Jonah do? Jonah gets in a boat and he heads to Tarshish. Okay, here's what I want you to understand. When we run from God, we usually run to stupid places. Isn't that true? I mean, think back in your life when you've run from God, even in one area of your life. You run to stupid places. Here's a map that will show you what it was like. He is in Joppa. If you ever get the chance to go over to the Middle East, there's a statue of Jonah right there where he would have taken off from. He's supposed to go to Nineveh, 550 miles. He goes, or starts to go, to Tarshish, which is 2,500 miles the other way. Basically what they considered the end of the earth back at that point. This is not just a no to God, I'm not going to Nineveh. This is an expletive no, okay? And it's so dumb. You're going to get in a boat and go out in the sea as you run away from the creator of the universe? This is like all of the horror movies ever made, right? Hey, do you guys hear a sound in the basement? Maybe we ought to go down there and get our heads chainsawed off. That's a great idea, right? Listen, if you're going to run from God, stay on the land. Don't go skydiving, all right? Just try to stay in a safer place. But this is what we do. And those of us from the outside, when we look at other people, we're gonna be looking at you like, you did what? You're gonna marry who? You're gonna work where? You invested in a what? You bought a what? I mean, when we decide to run from God, we just run to really stupid places. The second thing is, when we run from God, our life usually falls apart. Start thinking again. Maybe people you know that are running, or times in your life when you've ran. Did it go well? I mean, it might not be in a night or a weekend, but it usually starts to break up. Verse 4, the Lord sent a great wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose that the ship threatened to break up. All the sailors were afraid. They're sailors, and they're afraid of the storm. That's a big storm. And each one cried out to his own God, okay? This is Talladega Nights, I'm sorry. It's just Will Ferrell out there going, help me, Allah, help me, God, help me, Oprah. It's still a classic. Then the sailors said to each other, come, let us cast lots to each other, to find out who is responsible for this calamity. So literally, the storm's going, and they're like, all right, who's responsible for it? And they played spin the bottle, and the bottle went to Jonah, okay? And it didn't take very long for Jonah's world to unravel. Because when you turn your back on God, you're turning your back on the source of wisdom and truth. And you make unwise, misinformed decisions. You don't mean to intentionally. You probably think you're making good decisions. But when you're turning your back on the source of wisdom and truth, you're left with not wise and not true, and you make a bunch of bad decisions. And when you do that, those decisions will eventually come back to haunt you. You also turn your back on love. on unconditional love. Nobody's ever going to love you unconditionally like God does. And the problem is, when you run from God, it's the source of wisdom and truth, and it's also the source of love. So when you're turning your back and you're walking away from love, you go start to try to fill up your love tank in other places where you can get some love to figure it out, and you start trying to squeeze love out of relationships. You start squeezing love out of material goods or substances, obviously food, anything you can think of to find some kind of acceptance and love. And it's not available there. No matter how you try, it's not going to work. It's not your fault. It's just the nature of the fact that when you get farther away from God's love, it's harder and harder to find it. And you run and you can't find wisdom or truth or love because it's in the rear view mirror. The third thing I find about this story, and this is all stuff your kids are probably going to figure out this week too, is when we run from God, you always hurt the people who are close to you. If you live with, hang with, date, run with, marry someone who is running from God, as their life unravels, your life will be negatively impacted. We see it right here in the story of Jonah. I mean, not only is Jonah's life messed up and unraveling, but these sailors their lives are unraveling and they're in danger. And the first thing they do is they start to jettison cargo to lighten the ship so that it doesn't go under, right? Which means what? Which means when they get to their port, they're not going to have that. They're going to lose money. They might be losing their jobs because it was somebody else's cargo. And what did they do? All they did was let a guy on the boat who was running from God. They didn't even realize it. But when your life starts to unravel and you're running from God, other people around you are going to feel it. Single adult, teenager, do you know why your parents overreact when you date certain people? It's because they're the third party that's looking over your life and going, what? When you start to connect with someone who is running from God, no matter if your life is pure and on track, you're going to be hurt by the fallout of their lives. Moms, dads, if you are running from God, your spouse and your kids are going to be injured by the shrapnel of your life. And I think we have a generation of children in this country who are going to pay the price their whole lives because their mom and dad were runners. Well, that's fun, Tim. Thanks for that today. Well, here's the great news, you guys. God is always going to try to get you back. He's always going to try to get you back. The story of Jonah is basically the story of the prodigal son in the New Testament, or the father who couldn't wait for his son to turn around and come back home and throw a party. It's the entire story of the New Testament. It's the entire biblical narrative of grace and mercy in the Bible, all summed up in 4 little chapters. What we discover in the book of Jonah is that God, in his grace and his mercy, will involve himself in your unraveling. And he will plop himself down into the middle of your consequences, into the middle of the pain. And he will do whatever he can to bring you back. And if that means allowing you to be swallowed by a big fish, then that's what's going to happen. If that means allowing you to bump up against the consequences, it means exaggerating the consequences, then he will, because he wants for you to come back to him as the source of wisdom and truth and love. And Jonah's finally starting to get the connection. Once the lot fell to Jonah, he was like, oh, I guess this is my deal. So they asked Jonah, tell us, who's responsible for making all this trouble for us? What do you do? Where do you come from? What is your country? From what people are you? And Jonah answered, I am a Hebrew, and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the land that I should have stayed on. This has terrified them, and they asked, what have you done? And then they asked him, so what should we do to you to make the sea calm down for us? I love that. How are we going to fix this, right? And Jonah realized what I hope some of you realize today, that running from God was futile and pointless, and you can run from God, but you're never going to outrun God. And at least Jonah owns it, right? Because he throws up his hands and says, hey, pick me up and throw me into the sea. It will become calm. I now know that it is my fault that this great storm has come upon you. Instead, these are good guys. They did their best to row back to land. And they're like, no, we're not throwing you in, dude. We're going to try to save you. We're going to try to make this work. But God wouldn't let that happen. And the sea grew even wilder than before. And then they cried to the Lord, okay? Then they cried to the Lord, all caps. Whenever you see all caps in the Bible, that is the name for Yahweh, okay? That is the name for the actual God of the Hebrews. So what happens here is like they're scared at the beginning and they're like, yeah, help me, whoever, whatever God. And then he says, I'm a Hebrew, I worship Yahweh. And they get to the point where they're like, I think we're going to go to Yahweh now. They became believers in God in a really, really fast way, right? They said, oh Lord, again, please do not let us die for taking this man's life. Then they took Jonah and threw him overboard, and the raging sea grew calm. But the Lord God provided, he didn't let Jonah drown, a great fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was inside the fish 3 days and 3 nights. And what does Jonah do inside of the big fish? He prays. He prays his brains out, right? He prays the best prayer he's ever prayed in his life, just like you did when you were in trouble and you prayed, right? Dear Lord, if you get me out of this, I promise. Anybody ever made that prayer before? Okay. I mean, I can't tell you how many times. Dear Lord, please, I promise. I'll go into ministry for crying out loud. Dear Lord, please, whatever it is, get me out of this mess. That's the deepest prayer you will ever pray. Jonah 2:10, and the Lord commanded the fish, and it vomited Jonah onto dry land. What a fun story, right? I mean, don't you want to see the replay of this thing happening? And Jonah had a change of heart. No kidding. So what does Jonah do? This time, 2 chapters in, Jonah obeyed the word of the Lord and went to Nineveh. Now, we find out more about Nineveh. Nineveh was a very important city. A visit required 3 days, okay? Scholars believe this place was like 1 million people. On the first day, Jonah started into the city. He proclaimed, 40 more days and Nineveh will be overturned. He walks in and he gives the message God has given him, and he says, hey, all you wicked people, God is going to strike you down if you don't change. I mean, I thought when I was younger and I didn't understand the full story of Jonah, and your kids will probably get this, that Jonah was just really afraid of the Ninevites. He was just really afraid to go in and say, hey, if you don't change, because that seems like a really bad idea, right? I mean, but here's the unbelievable part. The Ninevites believed God. The king of Nineveh literally says, uh-oh, let everyone urgently call on God. Let them give up their evil ways and their violence, and who knows, God may yet relent and with compassion turn from his fierce anger so that we will not perish, okay? What are the odds of that happening? I mean, these people don't worship the God of the Hebrews at all. They're wicked, evil people. I mean, this is like me walking into ISIS headquarters and saying, all right, you guys, God told me to tell you, you need to shape up and turn around and head back to God, or he's going to take you out in 40 days. And having the leader say, no way. Hey, you guys, lay down your guns and pray to a God that you've been warring against all of your lives, and pray this doesn't happen. And then I lead them in 4 verses of just as I am, and they all come down and get baptized. That's basically what happens here. And here's the problem. Here's the part you may not know about the story. What does God do? When God saw what they did and how they turned from their evil ways, he had compassion and did not bring upon them the destruction he had threatened. Wait, that sounds like a great story, right? Oh, yeah, it's the great story that most of us focus on when we think about or hear about Jonah. It's amazing that God actually has compassion and mercy to these people. And again, the theme verse for Summer Jam is from Nehemiah about how God is slow to anger and how he abides in compassion and mercy. The problem is not that. The problem is chapter 4. If Jonah just would have kept chapter 4, more scholars believe that this is a self-reporting story that Jonah is telling, and he's writing this himself. It's autobiographical. And he should have left chapter 4 out, because then this story would just be everything that you've always heard and what your kids are going to learn. But in chapter 4, it says, "But Jonah was greatly displeased and became angry. And he prayed to the Lord, 'Oh Lord, is this not what I said when I was still at home? That is why I was so quick to flee to Tarshish. Not because I was afraid, but because I know you, and I know that you're a gracious and compassionate God, and you're slow to anger, and you're abounding in love, and you're a God who relents from sending calamity.' And dadgummit, I wanted calamity on the Ninevites. That's why I ran away." You heard it. You heard it right. Jonah didn't run from Nineveh because he was afraid. He ran from Nineveh because he was hateful. I haven't fully described the Ninevites to you yet. History records that they were one of those civilizations that were just evil to the core. They had a reputation for brutality. Archaeological records and royal inscriptions talk about impaling their enemies, about public executions, about just annihilating rebellious cities. They used psychological warfare to intimidate their enemies. They openly celebrated cruelty as a way to intimidate any future enemies, okay? So Jonah isn't struggling to just love his annoying neighbors that play their music too loud. He's struggling to love what he would have viewed as violent oppressors. And Jonah knew that God was a God of second chances, and he really knew it after God sent a giant fish to give Jonah a second chance, but he didn't want to give Nineveh a second chance. And to shorten the story for the sake of time, God calls Jonah out and basically says, "Hey, I can't help it. I'm a compassionate God. It's who I am. And I love the people of Nineveh just as much as I love you, even though they have been doing evil." And then there's this really great verse in verse 11 of chapter 4. And God says, "Plus, Nineveh has more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left." What is that about? Well, that's a euphemism for who can't tell their right from their left. Children. There's 120,000 children in Nineveh, Jonah. Should I not be concerned about that great city? I mean, maybe you're mad at the parents for the things that they have done, but think about the kids. Think about how much better their lives are going to be with God. Think about breaking the chains of evil in their homes and in their society and in the world in general. So what does this mean for us, Parkview? I've been thinking a lot about this as I've been unpacking Jonah again and thinking about what it's like now. When I came to this church in January of 1990, back in the day, I was coming to a mostly Catholic area, right? Most of you grew up in a Catholic influence of some kind or another, and I wasn't really very familiar with that, and I made a bunch of mistakes, and I figured out how to do ministry in the context that we're in. But we all serve the same God and feel the same way about Jesus. I'm thinking now about Pastor Jared, who's getting ready to move in and become the new senior pastor. And it dawned on me the other day, this is a completely different place, isn't it? I mean, think about it. This is an area that's becoming more and more multicultural. There wasn't a mosque up the street when I got here. We're talking about cultures that don't worship the same God, don't feel the same way about Jesus, because the mission field is at our door, and what are we going to do about it? Do I really want everyone to experience God's grace? What about those people on the other side of the political divide from you? What about the ones that you're always railing against in social media? Do you actually want everyone to experience God's grace? And how would we act differently if we did? Not theoretically, but actually. Do you want your neighbor? Do you want your ex? Do you want your difficult coworker, your difficult family member? Do you want that addict? Do you want that person whose lifestyle you disagree with to also receive the grace of God? Because God's answer to us is very clear. Hey, I love them too. And I just can't help it because I'm their dad also. And the book of Jonah ends with a question. Should I not be concerned about this great city? And then it just ends. There's no resolution, because basically what Jonah is doing is holding up a mirror to himself and telling the story and leaving it for us to write the ending. What are we going to do? I was listening to classic rock working out yesterday, and Billy Joel's song, Only the Good Die Young, came on, which is a horrible song. You know, I mean, you think about it. I don't need to go into it. It's just a horrible song. I mean, if I'm Virginia's dad, me and Billy are going to have a few words. You know what I'm saying? But it got to this line at the end that I'd never noticed before, where he says, your mother never cared for me, but did she ever pray for me? Did you ever notice that line? Just throws it in there. Your mother never cared for me, but did she ever pray for me? It's a great question. Will we keep running? Or will God finally show up and convince us that he's good and make us turn around? For some of you today, this is the day that runners need to come home, because you can't outrun God, okay? And for a lot of us, it's a day for us to rethink who we are in relation to this story. Do we care about the people that God cares about? Because you can run from God, but you can't outrun a God who loves you this much. Lord, I pray for this place as we move forward. I pray for the opportunities that are all around us, and I'm excited about what they are as we reach into the future, and as Jared unpacks a vision for us and where we're going to go into the future. And Lord, you brought people to our doorstep, and a lot of times, I know me, I look at some people and I think, they're on their own. I don't care. I don't like where they're at. I don't like what they're doing. I don't like what they stand for. I need to go do my own thing, just like Jonah. And I pray that you will break our hearts and help us to realize that all of those people that we don't think deserve your grace deserve it just as much as we do. And we may be the conduit through which that grace needs to flow. I ask these things in your name.